guys. This is video log number 4. Subject I'm going to talk about today, and I get asked this all the time, how do you take your training to that next level? The best way for progression, increasing your intensity levels, is to not focus so much on how much you're lifting, increasing your 1 rep max or anything like that. The way the body adapts over time, or the nervous system, is the biggest thing. And when I say over time, I'm not talking about weeks or months, I'm talking about years, with proper training protocol. In the beginning, the adaptive process is due to more quantitative adaptations. What I mean by quantitative is, increasing your sets, increasing your reps, and the amount of weight that you're lifting. So like in a beginner, you'll see them when they first start lifting weights. They have a pair of dumbbells in their hand, and as they lift the weight, their arms are shaking, kind of all over the place, not able to control the weight. So as they progress, even 2 to 3 weeks down the road, say they're lifting 25 pounds in the beginning, and they're, it's hard for them to control, and 3 weeks later they're lifting 30 or 40 pounds, with a nice smooth pace and able to control the weight. That's a nervous system adaptation. That's not, gains in muscle, and people confuse the two. So it's a neural adaptation, not muscular gain, so to speak, that's enabling that trainee to handle more loads, and more control with the weight. The first principle of exercise physiology is the overload principle. It states, as you adapt to stress, greater stress must be applied to continue making changes. Just like I said in the beginning, the easiest way to progress is to just add more work, whether it's sets, reps, or weights. And like what I like to refer to, which was in Scott Abel's book, The Abel Approach. He designed it. It's a nice thing to refer to as the circle of intensity, or circle of progression. As you progress down the circle, from the 12 o'clock mark down to the 6 o'clock mark, you do that by, as I said, increasing your work, whether it's sets, reps, or weights. But once you hit that 6 o'clock mark, to progress back up the circle, that's where it's more of a qualitative adaptation, and not quantitative. So what I mean by qualitative adaptations, that's more internal cues. So what you're trying to do is bring the muscle closer to its total activation potential, or maximum voluntary contractions. This has to do with recruiting the high threshold motor units. You hear people talk about increasing your firing frequency of the muscle, and just a greater force output within the working muscle. High threshold motor units are the hardest to activate. They're not typically activated until the exerted force is around 90% or greater of your maximum exertion. Now, the key word here being exertion, not maximum strength. There's a big difference between the two. So, at that point, at the 6 o'clock mark of the circle, to progress up and become more of an advanced trainee, you're going to focus more on training harder and not necessarily heavier, just adding weight. Pushing yourself harder, increasing your intensity is going to produce results. Also the duration of overload, not the amount of overload, is what produces an adaptive response at that point. So performing things like max singles does pretty much nothing for developmental purposes, because there's just not enough time under tension. There's not enough stress on the muscle for a long enough period of time. At that point, heavy has nothing to do with how much is on the bar. All these guys going out there, ego train, putting 3 or 4 plates on the bar and just moving the weight from point A to point B, thinking that this is going to build muscle, is just futile. So heavy has nothing to do with how much is on the bar, but which is an external cue. We're trying to focus more of how much stress the muscle is under, which is going to be an internal cue. And people just do not focus on the reps and the performance of the exercise enough. They're just focused on, I need to do 80 pounds for 10 reps, or 100 pounds for 6 reps, or whatever the numbers may be. That's their only focus. Most trainees are concerned only with the external cues, how much weight they're lifting, how many sets they're doing, how many reps they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, that has a place and it is a small factor in it. But when you're an advanced trainee, thinking that way puts limits on your ability to increase your intensity. The higher intensity training athletes are more concerned with things like movement pattern. So the best biomechanical movement that a muscle works in to get more stimulation out of it. Your joint angles, the speed of the lift, your tempos, those are more internal cues, activating that muscle while you're lifting it. So basically, if you're doing a dumbbell bench press, from the very first rep to the very last rep, you have equal exertion on that muscle from rep 1 to rep 10. In beginners, you'll see it, to them, it doesn't seem to get harder until rep 8, 9, and 10 at the end. When you're more advanced, your muscle firing frequency is activated as soon as you start lifting the weight. So rep 1 through rep 10, you have high exertion levels on that muscle. So you're going to stimulate more high threshold motor units, and you're going to get more results and better results out of that. So the proper performance of a rep and complete activation of the targeted muscle is what is going to take you to that next level. Knowing what planes and ranges of motion a muscle functions best in will properly overload the muscle, and yield even more activation and stimulation to that muscle, which will produce more results. And it's just the most optimal way to develop a muscle. All right, so kind of to sum everything up, I know there's a lot thrown at you. In the beginning, when you're a beginner to intermediate trainer, yes, increasing the amount of weight you use, increasing your total volume overall and the work that you do is going to stimulate growth to a certain point. But to take it to that next level, you have to focus more on the internal cues. So performing those reps, from rep 1 to rep 10, every rep, every set of every exercise, trying to stimulate as much muscle as possible and to fire those high threshold motor units. So focus more on activating the muscle and the feel of the movement. If you can't feel your chest working, during a dumbbell bench press, during a fly, or whatever it may be, then, something's not right. You're not firing those muscle fibers to get the most stimulation out of them. So number one, either your technique's off or you're using way too much weight. Most of the time it's a combination of the two. So kind of set your ego to the side, practice on activating those muscles. Starting on a squat at the top of the movement, flex your legs. There should be tension there. As you descend, there still should be tension in your legs. As you, do the concentric part lift, there should be tension. It should never release during the negative or the concentric part of the lift with every movement that you do. Now, yes, you're going to feel better contractions in certain movements than others, in a better stretch position than others. But overall, focus on that targeted muscle that you're working to get the most optimal results. And that's just something that's learned over time. It's not a switch you can turn on and off. It's an adaptive process, and it's neurologically based. It's like someone learning how to walk when they're a kid. It's just something that you have to practice and get better and better at. All right, so just kind of check your ego at the door, focus on firing the targeted muscle, and then from there you can progress the amount of weight you're lifting. But that's a second factor to actually getting the muscle to activate. All right, guys.